in the media conference with Lal Goyal, which is brought to you by V4 News, Global TV, V4 Stream, Malnadu TV India, News Gaon Se, Samvad Sarokar News, Bharat Post News, Organ Donation India Foundation and Gyan. Our endeavor is to enlighten you with the current topic. And as you know, today is Sunday, and Sunday is for our Thought Leadership Series. But before I will go on Thought Leadership Series, I would like to inform you today India is celebrating International Friendship Day. It is a special occasion which celebrates the ties of friendship and precious bonds of togetherness between people. Friendship is one of the most blissful relationships a person shares with another person. Friendship Day was first celebrated in Prague in 1958 as International Friendship Day. It was started by one Joyce Hall, who was the founder of Hallmark cards in 1930. It was Hall's idea to mark a day on which people would celebrate their friendships. The United Nations marked the honey-loving tubby bear Winnie the Pooh as the ambassador of friendship in 1988, and July 30 was designated as International Friendship Day in the 65th United Nations session in 2011. In India, International Friendship Day is celebrated annually on the first Sunday of August. That is, today is the first Sunday, that is 1st August. Media Conference with Lal Goyal wish you a very happy Friendship Day. Now coming to our Thought Leadership Series. Crisis moments create opportunity. Problems and crises ignite our greatest creativity and thought leadership as it forces us to focus on things outside the norm. Thought leadership is fundamental in business today and consists primarily of finding and sharing great information in a way that attracts and retains. Thought leadership is when a leader's thoughts are being used by leaders to lead others. Thought leadership is influencing a narrative by understanding what needs to be done. A thought leader can be recognized as an authority in a specific field and whose expertise is sought and often rewarded. That can be an expert, a historical figure, or a wise person with worldly impact. In this series, we'll be asking straight questions and we expect straight answers from our guest. And today, our topic is importance of research in emerging India. And today, our guest, who is a legend in the education, he is Dr. Sandeep Shastri. Welcome, Dr. Sandeep Shastri, on our show.
Thank you.
Dr. Sandeep Shastri is the Vice Chancellor of the Jagran Lake City University, Bhopal. Dr. Shastri prefers to describe himself as a teacher by instinct, researcher by choice, trainer by passion, and above all, a lifelong learner. Dr. Shastri's research has been in the fields of elections studies, federalism, political institutions and processes, Karnataka politics, and the teaching and learning process. He has authored 13 books, over 50 chapters in edited books, and over 95 articles in reference research journals, besides more than 350 op-ed page articles in leading international and national newspapers. Dr. Shastri is also a political commentator who appears frequently on television. He is the national coordinator of the Lokniti, an all-India network of social scientists involved in survey-based election and opinion studies. He is a consultant to prestigious international bodies like the United Nations, World Bank, and the Forum of Federations. He was an advisor on political party reforms in the Pacific Rim states to the UNDP, advisor on governance reforms in Nepal for the World Bank, and an advisor on constitutional reforms and transition to democracy in Myanmar and South Sudan for the Forum of Federations. Dr. Shastri played a key role in drafting the Karnataka State Youth Policy by serving as the chairman of the drafting committee of the said policy. Dr. Shastri has lectured extensively across the world and spoken at universities in more than 50 countries in all the 6 inhabited continents. He was chosen to participate in the International Visitor Program of the US government in 1995 and was a fellow of the Salzburg Seminar on Federalism in 1993. He has also been Ford Foundation Fellow and Indo-Canadian Fellow. Dr. Shastri has been an adjunct professor at University of California, Berkeley, and taught there in the summer terms. Welcome, Dr. Sandeep Shastri, on our show. Dr. Shastri, you yourself describe as a teacher by instinct, but researcher by choice. And so you are no one else can be the best person for today's topic, that the importance of research in emerging India. Now, today, this format of thought leadership series, we put straight questions and we expect straight answers from you. So I am starting, although it's very difficult to ask a question to a professor or a teacher or now a vice chancellor, but with courage, I am going to do. If anything wrong, if you feel that my questions are going in a wrong direction, you are free to guide me. Okay, now my first question is, what is the importance of research in emerging India?
Thank you so much, Lal Goyal ji, for having me here. And like you, let me extend a very warm Friendship Day greeting to all those who are there on this program. I think in the last 18 months, if the pandemic has taught us anything, the pandemic has taught us the importance of friends. And the pandemic has taught us how friends keep our hopes alive, keep our energy going, keep our enthusiasm always on top. So I think I would like to dedicate what I say today to all friends who I've had the good luck to have for the last so many years, and who in a way have contributed to the richness of life and the energy that we all have. Goyal ji, I always bat with a straight bat, so you don't need to worry about the answers to your question. Importance of research in emerging India. I think two words are important for me in the title that we have chosen: research and emerging. We are talking of an emerging India in the 21st century, which has the potential to be a global leader in multiple domains. And that's what I mean by emerging India. An emerging India which sees itself playing a critical role. I will not use a big word like world leader and all that, but India sees itself playing a major role in the emerging global order. And that role will be such that there will be no choice but for people to pay attention to India. In that light, what is the importance of research? I think research becomes very important for emerging India, because I'm not talking of research as a set of procedures or a set of results that come out of certain studies. I'm talking of research as a tradition, research as a culture, research as a process. And for emerging India, research as a culture, the culture of research. By culture of research, I mean the philosophy of research. The philosophy of wanting to dig deeper into whatever you are analyzing. The philosophy of wanting to understand reality around you. Asking the why question. Why does something happen? Why does this development take place? Why do these phenomena occur? Now that why question, the culture of research is asking that why question. And I think emerging India cannot be a major player in the world unless we in India develop this culture of raising the why question. And as I said, research is about a tradition. I'm one of those, Lalji, who argues that research is not about what we do at Indian Institute of Science or Indian Institute of Technology or ISRO or DRDO. Research is what every person does as part of his or her life. When somebody enters a kitchen to prepare a very tasty dish, he or she is undertaking research there as to what is the one best way of coming out with a Gurdesh. When I enter my classroom, I'm asking myself, how do I make the next 60 minutes very interesting for my learners? There is research that goes into that. When today PV Sindhu is going to play for bronze, she must have done a lot of research to ask herself, what are her USPs in today's game? So I think research is for me a tradition. And emerging India must embrace this tradition. Emerging India must embrace this culture, because this culture and tradition of research, of seeking to know, of asking the why question, of being inquisitive, of always seeking answers, is very important for a growing society.
Very much, Dr. Shastri, Professor Shastri, for giving a straight answer of my first question. Now my question is a bit alarming. The thing is, the several studies of publications trends have shown that India's share in the world research output hovers around 5%. But the rate of citations, the number of times these articles are cited and used as proxy for quality, is much lower at 2 to 3%. What is the reason of this?
Goyalji, you are right in saying that the number of publications from India have increased, no doubt about that. And you are equally right in saying that the true barometer to measure those publications is the citation of those publications by other scholars. And here we have not done as well as we should be doing. I will provide two explanations for that, Goyalji. One, I think first, there is the whole question of the takeoff stage of an aircraft. If I look at India's research as an aircraft, there is a takeoff stage where for a period of time, the aircraft has to go on the runway and pick up speed. And going on the runway, picking up speed, is to increase your quantum of presence, is to increase your number of publications that come up. And once that happens, you gradually take off to the skies where your focus is much more on quality. Now, what do I mean by this, Goyalji? When all of us started our research journeys, I started my research journey in 1982, nearly 40 years ago. My initial publications, which I came up with, were quality publications, which were cited by people, but they were not in the top class journals of the country. Because I still was a young researcher who was experimenting with topics, who was still digging deeper into subjects. It took me nearly 15 years, Goyalji, to come up with an article in what I would call the top class world journal in my discipline. Now, that was a very great day when that happened. But then for that takeoff to happen, there was a long runway that I had to carry myself forward on. So what am I hinting at? I'm hinting at that while the number of publications expand, I'm hoping that over time, our researchers do not just focus on how much they publish, but they focus on the quality of what they publish. And once the focus moves from quantity to quality, the scope for more citations happens. And my second point, a quick second point. I think somewhere I go back to my first point, a culture of research or a tradition of research. Today, a lot of people write because it is required to write. Today, a lot of people publish because you have to publish. Universities prescribe that a PhD student must have X number of publications before his or her thesis is accepted. Today, we all say that in a university, if we have to get promotion from one level to another level, you must have X number of publications. So there is a, if I could use the word, there is a race for more publications because it's a regulatory requirement today for publications. Now, Goyalji, this is a chicken and egg problem. Which came first, chicken or the egg? Do we meet our regulatory requirements of how many publications we need to have? Or do we tell our faculty, look, numbers is not important, quality is important? I think the Via Media is, in their initial journeys, people tend to focus on more writing. And as they become more experienced in their field, they look at more quality journals. They have then earned a name, and then they look not so much for how many I have published, but then what is the quality of the journal I publish in. So I think for me, this is the route forward. And these would be my two explanations for the points that you just now raised.
You have replied to my next question. I don't know what telepathy you have. My next question, which almost you have replied, but still I will read. The number of students admitted in PhD level research programs doubled from 77,798 in 2010-11 to 16,1412 in 17-18, increasing at the rate of 10% per annum. The primary reason for this surge is mainly due to making PhD as one of the prerequisite for faculty positions in universities and colleges, and also for career advancement, which you have already mentioned. Now, you says that because they have to publish so many papers, that's why they are going to get the promotions. But can't we have some time of Via Media that we will have ABC category of journals in India? Initially, the researcher can publish in C category, and once the editorial board, which will be of a reputed persons, decide that now this person is entitled to upgrade it to B category of journal, then they will recommend to send their his or her research paper publication in B, and C, then A. And then only you are allowed to publish in an international journal. The advantage will be that the position of ours today, see, we are 1/6 in population in the world, and only 2-3% of the citation is somewhere. When we are talking about that we are going to be a global leader, or we are going to have that meaning in a global scenario, why not our standard of research can be increased by media or something which you people can decide?
Goyalji, this is a very important point you have raised. And let me draw everybody's attention to what the Government of India and University Grants Commission is doing in this regard. When we started this process of requiring mandatory publications, we had fly-by-night journals which came up, predatory journals which came up, which started telling you, you submit your article today, you pay the amount tomorrow, and it will be published yesterday. I hope you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
So therefore, UGC came up with the norm that we will identify journals across domains, which is today called the UGC CARE list, where journals are listed out in the UGC CARE, and to be able to be considered for all the norms that are prescribed, it has become necessary today for faculty to publish in such journals. And there is over time a ranking of these journals also. You will also notice there are things like Scopus journals, Web of Science journals, which are of a very, very high quality. And the moment you publish in a Scopus journal or a Web of Science journal, then automatically your article or your publication gets a very, very high ranking. And then there are issues like impact factor of a journal, of your publication. So I think a lot has come in to try and regulate the quality of what is published. Now, I would be a little hesitant, Goyalji, in taking the route of saying that everybody should first publish at the lowest level and then go up, because you may well have a researcher who is very young, but then does very quality research work. And that work may be eligible for going straight to a high-level Scopus journal. So I would not talk of a hierarchy in terms of number of years of you being a researcher to be able to publish. I think let the scientific community decide how good a particular journal is, for how good a particular article is for being published in that journal. I think what we need to do much more in this country is to sensitize and to train the younger generation of scholars in this country to be able to understand what are the quality requirements of journals, and therefore understand where and how you can publish. On this, Goyalji, I'll make two small final points. I think as a society, we need to believe that working in the domain of research is extremely important. I think parents, schools, somewhere we need to sensitize the young generation that the future of a knowledge society is the fact that young, bright people take to research. And for that, automatically, we need to make important, attractive opportunities for entering into research. I must make the point that of late, the government offers very, very attractive fellowships for those who wish to pursue a career in research, who wish to pursue a career in taking research forward, doing a doctoral degree and doing research. And I must add here, Lal Goyalji, there is special emphasis that the government is giving today to women researchers. Women researchers who wish to pursue a career in research, both in terms of a woman researcher who is starting her research, or a woman researcher who for whatever reason has taken a break in her career and wishes to come back. There is a special impetus given to them. But I come to my final point on this question, Lal Goyalji. When I talked about a research culture, I think I am raising another question. Do we do research for a degree, or do we do research for passion? You see, if I'm doing research for a degree, then I'm worried about getting the degree. Be it PhD, be it MSc, be it MTech, I'm worried about getting that degree. And once I get that degree, that's the end of my research then, because I did research for the sake of a degree. But if I do research as a passion, my degree which I get is incidental, and my research degree is only the starting of my research and not the end of my research. Because Goyalji, all top class researchers, their real work, quality work, world-class work happens much, much after their PhD. So do you do research? Now, I think we need to encourage that culture in India where people do research as a passion and not research for a degree. Unfortunately, I think because of regulatory requirements, a lot of people are doing research for a degree. If you ask a lot of people, why are you registering for a PhD? Sir, the university has said, government of India has said that after 2025 or 2024, unless you have a PhD, you will not be considered for teaching. Now, yes, that regulation is important. But I think we need to somewhere build in that culture that you are doing research not because you want a degree, but then there is that heart and soul and that passion to pursue research. Unless that happens, I don't know whether we really would become an emerging power as a research powerhouse in the world.
When you are saying about heart and soul, There are allegations. Oh, you might be knowing very well. Copy, cut, paste. What you say?
In research language, we often call this plagiarism, which is taking somebody else's ideas and words and presenting it as your own ideas and words. I think this is one of the biggest research diseases that plague research across the world. And we find a lot of traces of this in India also. Why do people indulge in this? A, there is an opportunity to indulge in it and you think nobody will catch you. Two, you feel everybody does it, so let me also do it. Three, there is so much of pressure to do things that as a last minute haste, you see this as a way out. Goelji, what's the solution to this? Again, I think we need to build the culture of not wanting to copy. And where does this begin? This begins right in the early days of our education process. I think we need to train our youngsters in the education system that what you say is more important. Your job is not to collate what everybody says. What you say is critical. Goelji, with your permission, let me share a small anecdote. There was this gold medalist from an IIT who went abroad to do his PhD. And within 6 months of joining for PhD, he had to submit a series of assignments. And his first assignment came back. And his supervisor had written a very good assignment. However, next time, I want your views also. And the scholar said, this is the first time somebody has asked me for my views. Up till now, I only had to collect what everybody else said and present it. And I thought that is what research is all about, collecting everybody's views. This is the first time I am being asked my views also. So what am I hinting at, friends, sir? What I'm hinting at is when our children are in 9th standard, 10th standard, 11th standard, 12th standard, can we bring in that culture that when they write assignments, A, they don't copy it from each other and they don't copy it from somewhere. Because once you get used to copying, you develop the habit of copying. So when you come to undergraduation, you think it's perfectly normal to do that because you have done that in the past. And from undergraduation to post-graduation to research, that culture continues. Wherever I have worked and with whichever colleagues I have worked, one thing we have all done is ensure from the first day we are with the students, we make sure that they learn this culture of not copying. See, I teach in the PhD program. My first assignment to students, when I give it to them, and when I get it back, I pass it through the software which tells me how much has been copied. And then I send the report back to all of them. I said, here is the report. Then they tell me, sir, we never knew you will pass it through the report, through the software. I said, you should not be not doing it because I'm passing it through a software. You should not be doing it because you don't want to do it. And now let's begin that culture. And I tell them, if your assignments have plagiarism, then my worry is when you write a journal article, when you write your PhD thesis, that will come in. I want you to develop the culture of not taking down from others, of not, and if you take from others, acknowledge others. So I think that culture of learning, where we avoid the shortcut. See, I think, to be honest, we have a system where there is not much of penalty for doing something like this. Why is it that many times when we give an assignment at the college level or school level, if it's an assignment for a class of 30 students, it could well be that 5, 6 of them write it and all the others copy it from those 5, 6. Or they copy it from somewhere and try. And today, you see, technology allows us to make a lot of changes in what we copy also. Now, and I think the important thing is, how do we convince a new generation of learners that in the long run, learning is about your contribution. Learning is not about how much you copy from everywhere. So I think you are fully right in saying that this is a disease that has spread. And this is not just in India. We have seen this problem across the world. And I think we need to find the remedy. We have a lot of people have found the remedy for it. The only thing is we need to implement it and build that culture where people realize that this doesn't help me in the long run.
Professor Shastri, you mentioned about to inbuild this culture from the childhood or from the early age of the student. But we have a contract copying system in India, many of the states. So I think that is a challenging, very, very challenging thing. And I need not to explain, but everybody knows states like UP, Bihar, where their contract was given for copying. So how that culture will come when the student will come, as you rightly said, when he or she will come to do the PhD. Now, my question to you is, you have mentioned about that government is giving lots of benefits to the women or those students who wants to do the research, especially the girls or the women. Is there any reservation? Because 2 days back, our Honorable Prime Minister has announced the reservation in the medical studies, education. Now, is such type of reservation is there in research where the OBCs or the women or the economically backwards are giving any reservation or not?
Goyalji, when it comes to government-sponsored doctoral fellowships, I think it's very clear that the government policy of reservation is followed, and rightly so that our pool of talent which takes to research is drawn from the different segments of society. So there is very clearly a reservation policy when it comes to awarding of doctoral fellowships. You have a general category, plus you have all the categories which are mandated by the government. And as I said, there are additional reservations provided for women researchers under the government scheme. Also, when government sanctions, when government agencies sanction research projects, the factor that whether women researchers have created a project or whether this project has come from a researcher who belongs to a section of society which has been hitherto underprivileged. Now, these factors are kept in mind because it's important that we recognize the reality of India, where there is differences in terms of access to opportunities. And therefore, there is a need to ensure that those who have been denied this access to opportunities are also allowed a space. And Goyalji, I also would make the point that there is no empirical data to prove that just because of this policy being pursued, there has been any impact on the quality of research. There is no empirical evidence which demands, this is more of a hearsay and more of anecdotal evidence which people come up with. But as a researcher myself, I would always go by empirical evidence, and to the best of my knowledge, at least to my what I have read, there is no empirical evidence to actually prove this point.
Professor Shastri, you mentioned that the researchers, once they get the degree, then they go for the job. Is there any provision that these PhD holders will go for some refresher course in future so that they can update the researches which are going in that particular field, or there is no such type of provisions like we have seen in the civil services? They have a refreshers course. Many times they have to go. Even medical, there are conferences, but they don't have any particular this refresher course. But for this research, whether we have the refreshers course or not, because you know that education is such a thing, it's a everyday learning and new things are coming. And a person who has done PhD 30 years back, to know about what is happening today in the education field in that particular subject, is there any refresher course?
See, once a person with a PhD is recruited to a university as an assistant professor, it's important to note that for every stage of promotion, a faculty member needs to undergo certain training courses. Call them orientation courses, call them refresher courses. They are required, mandated to go through that, to successfully complete that before they go to the next level of promotion. Secondly, I also would state that today, in all universities that I know of, for assessment of teachers, the annual assessment of teachers also looks at the teacher's research contribution. What is the research contribution that the teacher has made? In fact, we at Jagran Lake City University have just completed a process where each faculty of mine, starting with me, I was the one to do it first. All of us came up with our goal setting for 1 year. What are our goals for 1 year? Research goals, teaching goals, administrative goals. And I started it. I said, here are my goals. I made it open to all my teachers. After 1 year, you ask me, I promise to do so much of research in the next 1 year, so many publications in the next 1 year. This is the goal I'm setting for myself. My deans did that. My directors did that. And we presented it before everybody. And then my faculty did that. And the inspiration for my faculty was that if my seniors are doing it, I should also do it. And I'm looking forward to March next year, when all of us will present, here was my goal and here is what I have achieved. Here is what I have done. So I think everywhere there is increasingly today a premium on research performance. In my earlier job and current job, I brought in one more thing, which is this. You may have a PhD, wonderful. PhD is a passport, but that passport requires a visa stamp. Where is the visa stamp? And what is that visa stamp, Goyalji? After your PhD, what is the research you have done? I have told faculty that in order to be recognized as a guide, your PhD is not enough. You got your PhD for yourself. Now, if you have to guide others, show me proof of work after your PhD. Show me proof of research after PhD, because that is what will make you eligible to be a guide. You see? So I think somewhere we need to bring that in so that PhD does not become the end of research, but the beginning of research.
And you rightly mentioned about visa. So visa is also having some expiry date. So I'm sure that the same way they have to come out. Yes, now, yes. Do you agree that like we have IITs, IIMs, specialized, and they are doing very well. Can't we have research institutes in different parts of India where the person can go, do the research, so that the credibility, like the engineer who is passing from a university or passing from an engineering college or passing from IITs, The difference is there. Everybody wants to become an IIT engineer or IIM business management. So do you think this type of institutes can be set up in different parts of India, by whether private or with a private public partnership or by the governments, so that the quality of research can improve? Because there, as you rightly said, like now you have started, but how many universities, and especially I'm talking of the government, big government universities in North, I'm not talking of South. What you say about that?
Goyalji, 3 points on this. Point number 1, we need to have islands of excellence, no doubt of that. We need to have islands of excellence, which often is reflected in our IITs, IIMs, NITs, and also our exclusive research-focused institutions. But I must immediately hasten to add a second point, which is, while these islands of excellence are doing great work, I think we should not ignore the fact that some very, very good research is happening outside these islands of excellence also. Some very, very emphatic, cutting edge, serious research is happening outside of these islands of excellence also. What I'm hinting at, Goyalji, is we should not create a new hierarchy in terms of research institutions, that these are the favorite children and these are the prodigal children, these are the leftovers. Now that should not happen. I'm very worried about that. While islands of excellence must prosper, along with islands of excellence, we also need to encourage and recognize good research that is happening outside these islands of excellence. And for this, I will draw your attention to 2 important points that we have in the national education policy. Point number 1, the national education policy hopes that maybe in a 5-year or 10-year period, we will have only 3 types of higher educational institutions in India. Number 1, research intensive universities which also do teaching. The focus of those universities is research, but they will also have a teaching component. Second category of universities they call is teaching intensive universities, which will also do research. They will focus on teaching, but also do research. And third and last, what they call autonomous colleges, which will be degree-giving colleges. Now, my only hope and wish and prayer, Goyalji, is this threefold categorization does not become a threefold classification. It should not be that this research intensive universities are the top, the teaching intensive are middle, and these autonomous that at the bottom. No, that should not happen. They should be at the same level. Only thing is their focus is different. And I think that's an interesting and important way of encouraging research. And also in the NEP, there is a talk of creating a national research foundation. A national research foundation which will fund quality research. The hope is that all government funding for research to universities will be through this national research foundation. And one very gladdening thing about the National Research Foundation is they have said, I mean, the NEP says, you should not discriminate between subjects. There has been a tendency in India to emphasize medical and engineering research at the cost of, let us say, management research, pure science research, social science research, law research. So now the national education policy says research across domains and interdisciplinary research is what is more important. And I'm hoping that this actually gets implemented, and this National Research Foundation not only will fund research, it will also be the platform for public and private funding for research to come together. And the National Research Foundation will also identify and reward good researchers. Now, if this NRF does all these three roles, I'm convinced there will be a huge boost and impetus to research. But Goyalji, as you know, there is always a slip between the cup and the lip. So my only hope is the national education policy's goals are actually translated into reality.
Professor Shastri, we have seen abroad, there the research, importance to the research is too much. Even the private players, they fund the research. Even I know one of the very leading consultant, they wanted to raise the funds for the research projects. And they says that out of 10, 9 will fail. But even if one will click, then the return is tremendous. Now, it might be in medical field or pharmaceutical fields. And nowadays, like we have seen in the vaccine, how the researchers have done. But in India, we found that the funding from the corporates are not that much into the universities or to the colleges for the research. Don't you think that we must create that atmosphere that the corporates will take few seats and fund the research, so that the quality of research, as you mentioned, and the funds will come, then the student, whosoever is doing research, will be comfortable knowing that if he or she will be doing proper research and the research will be approved, he or she is going to be appointed in that particular corporate soon after the research is completed. Do you think this is a good idea to implement in India, or it is already there in India?
Goyalji, this is a great question, and being a good student, I knew that this question will come, so I have prepared myself very well for this question. Let me take a step back. If you look at gross expenditure on research and development, what is called GERD, if you look at GERD, in India, it today stands at 0.7% of GDP. 0.7% of our GDP is spent on research and development. Ideally, it should be 2% for a country like India. I must also say that it has tripled in the last 10 years. What we used to spend in 2008 and what we are spending in 2021, it has increased 3 times. But then if you look at, if ours is 0.7%, if you look at other countries of the world, Korea, it is 4.29%. Singapore, it is 2.89%. USA, it is 2.73%. Sweden, it is 3.16%. Even a country like Malaysia is much higher than ours. If you look at the world average, it is 2.13% of GDP. In Asia, it is 1.01%. So somewhere we need to increase that 0.7% to at least 2%. Even though we are the 7th largest spender on research in the world, as you know, we also need to take it in terms of the numbers that we have in India. Now, Goyal sir, coming to your point, 42% of research funding in India comes from the private sector. I don't know whether you'll say only 42% or 42%. It depends on which perspective you want to adopt. I think there is no doubt that this 42% needs to increase. And also, the 42% expenditure on research by private sector is not into basic research. It is much more into product development and the business outcomes. In a country like India, to move forward, you need to fund basic research. Like what you said, 9 out of 10 times your experiment may not result in success. So I think the private sector funding for research needs to increase, and the private sector needs to be encouraged to actually spend on basic research. And if you look at the 58%, if you look at the 58% that government spends on research, half of that, 29%, half of that is for space and defense research. Space and defense research takes up half the money that the government spends on research. Now, I have no shadow of doubt that space research and defense research is important, is very critical, and that should continue. But we also need to expand the quantum of amount which is provided by the government for non-defense, non-space research, especially in the domain of basic research. So I think there is no question of doubt that the amount that we spend on research and development, both by the private sector and the government sector, must increase. One final point on this, Goelji, which is this. As somebody who has been an administrator at a university now for 13, 14 years, I've always had this dialogue with the business sector as to why do you not fund research at universities? Now, sometimes this is a chicken and egg problem. One day when I was speaking at a conference on this, and I'll not take any names, a leading corporate head called me aside at the end of the session and said, Dr. Shastri, demonstrate to me quality research that is happening in universities and I will fund that research. Show quality work that is going on, the corporate will come forward and fund it. And my answer was, have you really seriously made an attempt to find out the quality of research that's going on? Have you opened a channel for dialogue? So I think there is, this attitudinal problem, okay, that the corporate world feels that you all are doing armchair research and not serious research. And academics feeling that our research is not given the type of value it should be given. Now that wall needs to be broken. That bridge needs to be built to ensure that the academia and the business world learn to talk to each other and not talk at each other. They need to talk to each other and look at ways in which they can collaborate together to take research forward. This, I think, is an important imperative for business leadership and academic leadership to take up.
You said that the bridge or the wall has to be broken and the bridge has to be made. But Professor Shastri, after all, how many research has been done and how many Nobel Prize India got? Whatsoever Nobel Prize, we say that the Indian is there, but Indian is not. They have already surrendered the citizenship. They have become any other country's citizen, preferably US citizen. So if the quality is so high, as you are saying, the corporates are ready, but they also want to see that somebody is winning some award or their research is recognized or their research has been, like I will give you the example that this Wimbledon, as you have started with the Olympic, now I'm giving the example of Wimbledon. The commentator, when the match was on, they applauded and appreciated the researcher team who has researched for the vaccine of COVID. And they were sitting in a special box there and everybody was giving them standing ovation. Now, how many in India? We are 1.3 billion people. We have how many research? Now, one of the reason which the people says is remuneration in research in India is less. Even if you compare with the other avenues of employment in India, what unless they are satisfied financially, if they have no tension of that their family will be taken care, because we know that once the person is doing research, generally they have their own family to look after. They cannot be burden on their parents. So don't you think that the one of the reason is the financial constraint for a researcher? He is not getting that much remuneration, or you think they are getting too much but their output is not that quality? Professor Shastri.
Goelji, 3 points on this. You talked about our not having enough Nobel laureates who did their work in India. The fact that a lot of Indian origin Nobel laureates did their early education in India and then went abroad to pursue their research and succeeded is indicative of the fact that the potential is very much there for people to actually reach that cutting edge standards of research. Why is it not happening in India itself? I would say there are a variety of reasons, and I would not like to point out to any one single reason. One reason I think very clearly is there is a need for funding. The fact that only 0.7% of our GDP is spent on research and development. We need to ensure that there is enough funding to be able to do that cutting edge research, which would lead to world-class recognition. So that's point number one. I think there is a need for expanding the scope of funding, both government and private. Number two, we need to de-bureaucratize the research process. See, I have been lucky to work for 20 years in a government university, and after that for 18 years in the private sector. And I know that there are advantages in both and challenges in both. I know that the government sector, there are so many advantages, but there are challenges. Similarly, in the private sector, I think the disincentives which are there for people to do research in terms of the hierarchies that are created or the bureaucracy that is there would have to be resolved. I still remember way back in the 1990s, when I got a grant, a private agency gave a grant to do research, and I routed it through a university. And the money from that grant came to the university for me to do my research. Goelji, for 500 rupees to be released, it required 22 signatures, 11 going up, 11 coming down. Now, because people in the university knew that my work was important, we managed to get those 22 signatures within one day. But many others tell me that they are dissuaded from doing research because of the procedures which are involved in being able to get your grants and your money released. So are you going to spend time doing research, or are you going to spend time chasing your file and making sure that the amounts are released? So I think there is and I think a lot has changed since the early 1990s. A lot has changed. But I think there needs to be greater de-bureaucratization of the research process. And which brings me to my third point. I think we need to incentivize research, and we also need to make research accountable. Yes, there could be better incentives to take to a research career. And to be honest, Goel sir, today to be in a teaching position or to be in a research position is actually quite remunerative in terms of salaries and compensations is actually quite good, especially if you bring into the job an element of quality. But I also believe that there has to be a sense of accountability. Now, I'm not too sure whether those accountability mechanisms are as strong as they should be. Now, if I were given a grant for doing a particular research project, should there be greater accountability in terms of how that grant was used? Whether the grant was used for, whether that grant resulted in the project being completed, and whether that project completion resulted in discovery of a product and it went on to a service. Now, did we go from lab to the market? Now, all those questions become extremely important when we talk about the accountability of research.
Okay. Now, there is a gap in the research in India and Western country. Do you think research can bridge that gap between India and the Western world? But right now, what is happening, as you rightly said, that a researcher who is doing who is a student with his master's degree in India, going abroad, doing the research there, taking the citizenship there, no, they are welcoming them. But in India, there is no such type of either the incentive or that atmosphere where he or the boy or the girl or the student can get that atmosphere to do the research. So the atmosphere is important. Or do you think that universities or the government should try, although the national education policy has mentioned now the good universities can open their campus abroad, and they are other from the other countries, the good universities can open their campus in India. Do you think this move of the government in the National Education Policy 2020 will bridge this gap, and we will see in future few new Nobel laureates in India?
Goyalji, this is a important question and also a very complicated question. If you look at the national education policy, they use one word a lot, rootedness. That education in India needs to be rooted to the Indian reality, needs to focus on Indian needs and the Indian reality, which is very good. With regard to collaborations, international collaborations, I think NEP makes a very, very important principle. It develops a very important principle where it says collaboration should be for mutual benefit. We should not be here to give a platform for foreign universities and agencies to come and set shop in India. Collaboration should be as equal partners. Collaboration should be that there is something we gain from you and something you gain from us. See, the focus on indigenous knowledge, the focus on indigenous systems of learning, the focus on our own wealth of knowledge that this country possesses, the focus on where India can be the knowledge provider to the world. So I think the national education policy makes the point that collaborations are not to make us a platform for outsiders to come and tell us what to do. Collaboration should be on an equal footing, that we and the other collaborate as equal partners, where we have something to offer and we have something to receive. Now, for me, this is very important, both in terms of process and in terms of philosophy, that we are approaching this partnership not as a funder-client relationship. You see, we are approaching this partnership as equals. Now, I think that is a extremely important step forward. And Goyalji, that step will result in India not just being a knowledge consumer, but a knowledge producer. See, I think the way ahead is for India to be a part of knowledge production, a significant part of knowledge production, and not just a significant part of knowledge consumption. Now, this important change is, I think, to move from being a net consumer to be a producer of knowledge is, I think, something which the national education policy aims at. And I do hope that we will have an opportunity in this country during our lifetime to see that actually starting off.
Professor Shastri, recently, for last 1.5 years, because of the lockdown, online education has picked up. And now universities are also accepting and it has become a norm that if everything is going to open again, but still the blended education will be the future, where 33, somebody says 33, or whatsoever. Now, in that scenario, many of the colleges, universities, buildings, huge buildings are not to be used because once the online education, and we have seen I should not name, but in India, the main emphasis is on the administrative block. While abroad, I have seen few of the colleges inside, their main emphasis is on the laboratory or the library. While in India, we emphasize on the administrative block. Don't you think now the time has come that when the universities and even the colleges which are doing all this research work are providing, they must use give the main emphasis for the infrastructure, for the research work, instead of creating those types of unproductive things like administrative blocks or the canteen. I will just tell you, the other day I was having in a media conference, one of the director of a reputed university, he said, Mr. Goyal, the problem in India is that we are imparting education, but the students are not taking the education. They don't want to learn. I said, why? Because he said that they want to go to the canteen. They are not coming to the library. Earlier, the students used to go to the library. And then I gave an example of Imperial College London. I said, I have visited the library there because my son studied there. And I found that the library is having everything, all the canteen, whatsoever the canteen is offering, the sandwiches, the Coke or the coffee, tea, everything is available. People can read 24 hours. They are spending 24 hours there. And that's why they are being able to give good quality knowledge. One more important point here I would like to add, when this Oxford has taken this research work for this AstraZeneca, they have dedicated a complete block for the vaccine where the research has taken place. Are we having that type of now open mind to provide these types of facilities to the researchers so that the future in Indian researchers will be very, very comfortable, and they will not go here and there, and they will try to do their research systematically, thoroughly, and honestly?
Goyalji, you have raised 3 types of questions, and I will address all the 3 types of questions. One question I would like to start by addressing is, how do we motivate learners to learn? I actually, Goyalji, see no problem in students spending time in the canteen, because a very important learning is also going on in the canteen. Possibly a very important dialogue is also going on in the canteen. Possibly an important socialization is also going on in the canteen. And if I, as a teacher, have made my formal class so interesting and raised so many questions, Maybe the canteen is the place where they will carry forward that discussion. I know of some of the greatest philosophers of the world who actually had some of their most intense dialogues in the canteen. When I was a student, I remember some of my most favorite teachers, once the class was over, they would say, "Come, I will take you all to the canteen for a cup of tea or coffee and let's carry on the discussion there." So, for me, the canteen is a university canteen is a very, very important space for a meaningful dialogue. But Goyalji, does that dialogue happen? It depends on whether I have triggered that dialogue off through my engagement in the classroom. Has the student gone to the canteen to get away from the classroom, or has the student gone to the canteen to extend the discussion of the classroom? If the second is the case, I have no problem with going to the canteen. And I think we need to ask ourselves the question as facilitators: how do I make that classroom engagement with my students relevant to the real world that they are going to work in tomorrow? Do I give them that life experience which helps them through my classroom for what they need to be engaged in the outside world? So that's my first point. On the second point, yes, institutions have for a long time focused on infrastructure. And what type of infrastructure? As you rightly said, in some places, the administrative block is the most important. And I'm very happy that I do hope once this pandemic is over, you get a chance to come to Jagran Lake City University. The first big building you will meet when you enter Jagran Lake City University is our triangle, what we call. And what is this triangle? It's an iconic building. This triangle is our library. We have shaped our library in the form of a triangle. What is adjacent to our library? It's the hostels. And what is on the other side of the library? It's the canteen. So this triangle is important for me, the triangle building, the hostel and the canteen, where a lot of student activity goes on. My office, the administrative office, is one of the smallest buildings on the campus, because the university authorities decided that priority has to be learning. So you're right. To a large extent, what is the focus of the university becomes clear in the type of structures that they have. And today, a lot of universities are realizing that the infrastructure we have developed now needs to be reused in some way. And one important way that many of them are thinking of reusing it is to turn them into research centers and research laboratories. So a lot of space which is now possibly becoming redundant is being used for this. And now let me come to my third point. When we went into the pandemic in March last year, none of us were prepared for online learning. And I'm not just talking about India. When you talk to colleagues who are in leading Western universities, they also say, we took to online learning not by choice, but by necessity and compulsion. We all went into online learning by compulsion. And we learned along the way how to manage it. Now, today, after 1.5 years of online learning, many of us have learned how to take advantage of online learning. Today, we all conduct activities on our online class. We never knew we could do that. We have a lot of group work on online class. All that is today possible. Now, when we move back to a new normal, I don't know when that will be, but whenever we move back to a new normal, I think the word you used is going to be critical: blended learning, where we will have a combination of physical classrooms as well as online classrooms. I think both will come in. And the challenge before us academicians is how to leverage the best of, you see, there are certain things which cannot happen unless you do it in a physical classroom. And there are certain things which can be better done through an online classroom. So we will have to rework our strategies of learning to decide what is best online and what is best offline. We will have to look at our curriculum and see which parts can be transacted online, which parts need to be dealt with offline. So this is something which will have to happen. A lot of universities are already working in that direction. So making the best of both the worlds, and I don't think any infrastructure will ever go waste. Infrastructure has always the potential to be used more effectively. Because remember, Goel sir, also with every passing year, we are wanting to increase the general enrollment ratio in higher education. We want to bring that ratio to a higher level, which means the number of people who will seek higher education is much more. So therefore, that infrastructure, we may not need to expand our infrastructure, but we will definitely have opportunities to use that entire infrastructure that we have.
Yes, you mentioned about the increase this year, definitely, because I'm not talking of the research, but I'm talking of the undergraduates, because the 12th standard 100% result, while the UP, I can tell you the data says about 50 or 55% used to pass the last 3-4 years, the average. So it means the additional students input will be about 40 to 45%. Definitely those colleges who are bleeding may get a respite from this because they will be getting extra. Now my question to you is, like, because we are talking very academically, but I want that the people wants to know how research can enrich lives of the citizens, or in other way, do you think the research can also give more benefits to the country and in turn to the citizens? What you say, because you have done research, you are doing researches, you have trained those persons, whether these research are only for the academician purpose or academic purpose or really beneficial, we have not or the public wants that, what advantage they will get?
Goel sir, I think the fundamental point all of us need to underscore is raising the question of the social relevance of our research. Is our research going to be limited to the journal articles we write? Or does that research get translated into product development over time and services to society? I think no research worth its name would really be of any use unless we are able to transform it into something that is socially useful. Now, I think it's the duty of every researcher to ask herself or himself, what is the social utility of the research that you do? How is this research going to benefit society? Whenever I sit in a PhD viva, I ask the PhD student, what is your PhD work's contribution to society and to knowledge and to solving the problems of society? So I think this is a very, very valid and important question to ask. Now, if and let me say how a lot of this research has to be socially useful and productive. Now, you mentioned in your introduction that I was privileged to head the Government of Karnataka committee to write the state's youth policy. Now, how did we write the youth policy? When I was asked to take up the task, I said, look, by no stretch of imagination do I look like a youth. How do I write the youth policy? And the authorities told me, what do you want to do? I said, I first want to do a youth survey. I want to do a youth survey in Karnataka to understand what are the aspirations, expectations, challenges, anxieties of young people. That was the research we did. And that research ultimately was an input. That research was the input for the youth policy of the state. So we formulated the Karnataka youth policy based on this input that we got. When today I do research on constitution making, this research is based upon my field experience in South Sudan and Myanmar, where I was involved in some way in that process. Social utility of the research you do. In my current university, Jagran Lake City University, my engineering department came up with a very simple research. Can we come up with, and this is the early days of the lockdown, can we come up with a low-cost sanitizer, a low-cost sanitizer dispenser, which can be placed at different places in the university? And we did it through our own researchers. The social utility of a research that we take forward. My journalism school has come up with research which is not about high theory. It is about how we can actually understand social media today, new media today, role of media today by case studies of actual developments and by running a 24/7 radio platform and TV platform totally run by the students. Now here is doing research, consultancy and extension activity, which has very visible social utility. I have my Faculty of Liberal Arts working with the Madhya Pradesh police to help police personnel deal with the pandemic related trauma. Because police deal with society, police have their own families, police have their own problems. Now, how do we relate that? Last week, we did a research program on 21st century skills. What are the 21st century skills that high school students need? And we presented what is research being said on this, so that school teachers and school administrators could take it forward. The principal secretary of Madhya Pradesh School Education came for the program and said, I want the deliberations to be reached to me so that we can implement it for government schools also. So I think a lot of, we always need to ask ourselves the question, why am I doing this research? For whom is this research? Who is going to benefit from this research? I think that would be research funding usefully spent at the end of the day.
Okay, and now because the paucity of time, questions are there. But last, what advice you would like to give to the students? 1 minute only, please.
My only advice to students is be passionate about what you learn. Develop the passion for what you are learning. Allow your heart to take over and don't study that which you think is fashionable to study. Study that which makes you feel passionate about what you are studying. And when you study something with passion, the road will always open up in the future, because there is no field of work where there are no opportunities. Follow your passion, live with your passion, work with your passion, and success will be yours. That is my small message to young students.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Sandeep Shastri, for giving all the very, very straight, I must say, replies to my questions.
So you
Although
bought several googlies, and I had to then be very defensive in my responses.
but I must appreciate it's very, very difficult to put up a question to a person who is of that much caliber. But hats off to you. Thank you very much. And today's program has been live telecasted by V4 News, Global TV, V4 Stream, Malnadu TV India, News Gaon se, Samvad Sarokar News, Bharat Post News, as well as it was shown live on Facebook and YouTube.